Hi everyone, welcome back to the Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Red Sofa. I'm joined by Marion Gillich, who is leading on supplier risk management for Daimler Trucks, an important role that we're talking about in our final session of the day here, when we look across at risk and all the change which is coming, and of course there's plenty of risk on the horizon as we'll talk. But let's talk about how you do this at Daimler. How do you segment different risks, be it financial, geopolitical, regulatory, and otherwise? And how do you set the different consequences and actions that you take from that?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So as you said, my role is supplier risk management, but sometimes I feel I have to explain it a little bit more before answering your questions, because we sometimes confuse supply chain risk management with supplier risk management, and we're very specific here because we're also focusing this area on supplier risk management. So that means my department and me, we're looking at the risks that can happen at the supplier site, at the production site, right? This does not include, for example, everything that could happen in the transportation site, right? We have other colleagues doing that, right? So this is the first focus point where we're saying we're looking at supplier risk. And then when we look at supplier risk, there is no one-fits-all solution. Every company, every corporation, as we did, we're focusing on very few risks, supplier risks, which we feel are essential for us. And we have, for example, defined that's financial health, it's geopolitical risk at the production side of our suppliers, it's natural catastrophes, right? It's regulations, and we're focusing on these topics. So first, no one fits all. Focus on what you want to look at, because otherwise it's becoming blurry. There is a multitude of risks that you could, of course, monitor and track, but then it's becoming too blurry. So that is the first thing. The second thing is, we were also, from focusing on these risks, seeing which data do we have already available without having to get too many external data, but what do we already have in our realm of procurement and supplier management? Which data can we use, right? So that we can already get started with the data that we have. Then we have seen if this data is sufficient to basically feed the different risk categories, or if here and there we still have to buy some external risk indicators. And the third most important point in building up a efficient supplier risk management for me is have a consequence management. Because, well, you've defined your risk categories, you know which data you have, but then you have to do something with the data. Because just data for the sake of it doesn't help you at all. So think about what is the use case and what is the consequence management that you build out of that gain transparency that you have.
Absolutely, and we're talking more about that absolutely in our session. But if we turn as well to the possibilities in digitalization, the tools that you're using or could use to work on those different risk categories and your consequent management, can you give us a high-level view of how that's changing and how that's developing at Daimler?
Well, because we're gathering so much data right now, so this is beyond what you can do manually. So you definitely need systems for that. And of course, sometimes AI can also help, because one part is that we're also doing is not just looking at the risks that are in the breadth of the risk, but also in the depth of the risk, which means also beyond tier ones. And that's definitely beyond any manual capacity that you can do, where AI can actually help you to do some tier N mapping, right? So that is one aspect of the digitalization that we're working on, not just to get the breadth, but also the depth of the data, of the information, and with support of data, right? And then we're also looking into, maybe it's a very simple thing, but also into the visualization of those risks, right? And the data that we have. Because it's not just for management, but for the day-to-day user, which is procurement in our case, and supplier managers. So you have to visualize the data and make the risk transparent in a way that they understand it. And here it's very simple. You don't need Gen AI to do that, right? First it is human intelligence, and then sometimes, for our case, a simple Power BI can already help. So for me, it's more important than the technology is really who's my customer, who's receiving the data, what's the use case for this person, and how do we make this data work for the customer? Not so much about the technology then behind.
That's really a great point. I wanted to just go back on the consequence management, which you raised, as clearly that's important. How is that developing? Maybe you can give an example or two of how you've implemented that.
Yep. Well, we're still in the process of it, right? Because my department is quite young, it's just 2 years old now, right? So we're still building up also the consequence management for all the different data points that we have. But I think an example of that I can give you is from the sustainability part of my department. We're collecting CDP data, Carbon Disclosure Project, from all our suppliers, right? So every supplier fills out a questionnaire, gets the CDP score, we receive it from CDP. We have data for, let's say, the last 4 to 5 years. What we've been doing with this data up till now? Not much, right? So we created a report to the management. These are the CDP scores of our suppliers over the past years. That's it. PowerPoint, read, put aside. Next year, same thing. Now, the consequence management that we're starting to build is what do we do with this information, with the CDP score? Do we actually want to build that into our awarding readiness index to score a supplier if we want to give the supplier more business or not? So we're still developing that, but that's what I mean. You have to have a consequence management, something that you do with the data. Just a small example of the CDP here.
No, that's a great example. And kind of perhaps partly related, but we talk as well across this event and in our session about the compliance landscape, the regulatory landscape, battery passport, deforestation. We can talk about that all day. How broadly did you see this influencing your systems and processes further in terms of supplier risk management?
Well, you're right. I mean, the regulations that are coming, they all make sense, right? Each one of them. But the complexity of for us as OEM, and of course also for our suppliers, is massive. And I'm still looking for this solution that brings everything somehow together. Because as you mentioned it, we have CBAM, we have EUDR, we have the battery regulation. So now talking from an OEM perspective, we need to approach the supplier with an Excel sheet or with some kind of tool for each one of these regulations, singularly, right? And this must be super tiresome and complex, not just on our side, but also on the supplier side, to actually keep track of what do they want from me now again, right? So if we can have something that combines at least all these EU-driven regulations in one portal where the supplier could interact with us OEMs, that would increase data quality, process efficiency, and which make this entire process so much more streamlined. So the regulations are there, we need to comply with it, but they need to be somehow supported with a digital platform, with a digital layer to unify this.
So, message out there for our audience. If someone can build that solution, or if the EU is listening, we recommend to build it. We can follow up with Marion on more details on that. Last question. As you face this transformation and risk and complexity in a young team or young department, how do you see the skills and shape of the roles in your team evolving over the coming years?
Yeah. Actually, we've been through this process this entire year because we first started with, let's say, the process experts, right? I have risk managers who have banking or financial background or legal background in insolvency management. So that was great to build the process and stabilize the process. But beginning of this year, we saw that we as business need to work with the data. We cannot just rely on IT to help us. So we need to have some kind of expertise and capacity in the business that have a good understanding of data. Call them data analysts. They are really, I call them more like the translator between the business needs that, for example, my risk managers have and our IT, because they know both worlds a little bit, right? So these kind of translators between both worlds, plus to have the capacity to build your own data lake or your Power BI dashboards on top of the data, is something that can be anchored in the business and doesn't have to be with IT, because then you're much faster and more agile if you have these capacities, let's say in supplier risk management and sustainability as we have it. And we need to build on that. That's definitely our bottleneck. We need more people like that.
Well, we're excited to see those that continue to develop. Really pleased that we can share these insights and evolution with our audience. And thank you so much for being at this event. We'll be sharing more from the Roadmap 2030 Managing Risk in Supply Chain session with Marion and others on our live blog. And keep following us on LinkedIn for more highlights. But for now, Marion, thanks so much for being with us. We look forward to keeping up with you on this.